Hello, I'm Caitlin McDonald, and welcome to the newest episode of the Social Speak Network podcast. Today, we are joined by Daniel Goldberg, the founder and CEO of Gold Medical Marketing. Daniel Goldberg is widely regarded as a pioneer in medical marketing and public relations, and was an integral part of the transition to direct-to-patient marketing. Daniel's unique knowledge of the business of healthcare and patient behaviors allow him to create marketing and public relations campaigns that reach specifically targeted audiences that maximize ROI. His ability to identify markets for potential patients allows Gold Medical Marketing's clients to penetrate new audiences and increase patient volume exponentially. Daniel has also lectured both nationally and internationally on the topic of medical marketing at some of the most esteemed medical conferences. Daniel founded Gold Medical Marketing in 2012 after serving as the Director of Marketing and Business Development in a private orthopedic practice. In the process, Gold Medical Marketing has grown to be one of the most successful medical marketing firms and represents medical practices across the country. So please join me in welcoming Daniel to our podcast. Well, Daniel, we are so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a true pleasure.
Great. Well, first, to kick things off, tell us a little bit about your background in digital marketing.
So I've run Gold Medical Marketing for about 8 or 9 years. My background in digital marketing started when I was working within a private spine practice. It was about 10 years ago, so it was really at the pivotal point in where Google AdWords and even social media started to become patient acquisition tools. The shift from traditional SEO to SEM was starting to happen. I learned sort of on the fly about SEM and about social media marketing and sort of the power of those tools for patient acquisition. So shortly after I worked in that practice, I started this firm, and we've grown ever since, and it's been a fun journey.
Awesome. Isn't that interesting how most people, who run agencies now or run legitimate agencies, if you will, kind of got their start in digital marketing and social media just on the fly. You had to learn it while you were in it.
Yeah, it's funny to talk to some of our employees or some of the people who either majored in it in college or, sort of are new to it, and they've done 2 or 3 years of work within digital marketing and use things like, Google's tutorials and stuff to learn it. And they have a good grasp on it, but they don't, it's funny to discuss with them some of the changes that have happened over the past 5 or 8 years, where what they're looking at isn't historically how it worked. And it was a lot more difficult to track things like successes in patient acquisition, things like that, where the data now and the data tools are so much better than they were even 5 or 8 years ago.
Oh my gosh. I mean, even 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more data and the better those tools become, the easier it is to work with clients and sort of report meaningful data to them.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your practice and your view of digital marketing. So your business, Gold Medical Marketing, really takes a holistic approach to marketing, where you not only help manage social media or advertising campaigns, but you also encourage a review of website design and analysis of what happens offline, which a lot of agencies don't really pay attention to. So can you describe how your process differs from a traditional digital marketing?
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, I'm sure you well know, the patient experience and the patient journey is different. That's something you have to understand when even building a website to creating digital marketing campaigns. You have to understand how the patient thinks, how the decision-making process works, and then how to cater to that. So with something like web design, a lot of times practices will want to create a website that they like or that they think is the best for them, but it doesn't. The experience, whether it's the mobile experience or the content, doesn't suit the patient. It's not what the patient's looking for. Aesthetically and outwardly for you as a practitioner, it can look nice, it can be what you wanted, but the navigation is difficult, the calls to action aren't there, and those are the things that convert patients. So we have to look at things from a branding perspective of the practice, but also integrate the best practices for patient acquisition. Everything for us starts usually with the website, because whether it's social media traffic, Google traffic, even offline things like, print and magazine ads, those calls to action on those ads are always going to direct back to the website. Sort of the front door of your practice is now your website. So we want to make sure that if we're spending money, either in traditional marketing or digital marketing, we're bringing the potential patient to a place that has a high likelihood of acquiring that patient. So that's why we always look at the website first and say, okay, from a mobile perspective, is your website mobile responsive? As of April in, I think, 2014, Google started penalizing sites that weren't mobile responsive. That was 5 years ago, and still to this day, I'm shocked at the amount of practice sites we look at that aren't mobile responsive. So that has a huge influence on your organic SEO, your cost per click for Google ads, just the overall patient experience. So looking at those things, plus the content, the calls to action, those are things we have to look at first before we start any sort of marketing program.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then can you talk about how the patient journey really, it transcends offline again, back to when the person at the front desk is answering that call and scheduling that initial appointment. So can you talk about how you bring language kind of all through that process?
Absolutely. So we work a lot with orthopedic, spine, and neurosurgery practices. And it's in those instances, patients have an inherent fear of seeing a surgeon because they think they're going to be told they need surgery. So a lot of them try to delay seeing a surgeon as long as possible. They try other means, and finally get to a point where they acknowledge that they need to see a specialist for this. When they're calling and they're doing their research, whether they're getting a recommendation from a friend or family member, they're recalling an ad, whether it's a print or billboard or TV ad they saw, they're going to do their research and they're going to look at the physician or the practice themselves. So again, that's going to be their website. So bring them to the website and making them understand that the practice understands their concerns, understands some of the fears or potential misconceptions they have about seeing an orthopedic surgeon or about having surgery. That's important. Once that patient is even comfortable enough to then call the practice, at the front desk staff, the reception staff, that's your first line, right? So that patient, that's the first interaction that patient has with your practice. So the willingness of the reception staff to be accommodating, to understand, to listen, to not rush the patient is very important. But they're also the importance of the receptionist to be able to answer some preliminary questions. So if I call your practice and I say, hi, does your doctor do this type of procedure? If the reception staff says, hold on, let me check, I'm not sure, that sort of lack of confidence translates to the entire patient journey, because the first person that patient spoke to wasn't confident. So now they start to lose confidence in that practice. A lot of patients are looking at multiple different practices in the area. They're calling different practices. And in most cases, they're going to go see the doctor whose staff made that patient feel the most comfortable and feel like they've come to the right place. So that's a very important part of marketing that I think is overlooked. You can bring calls and traffic to a site, and you can bring calls to the staff, but if that staff can't sort of capture them or isn't confident in making that patient aware that this is where they should be, then you're spending money but not getting anything out of it.
That's such a great point. And I think it's so important that we don't ever view it, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we won't ever view digital marketing just as its own little bubble. It really is integrated in every part of your practice, from that first conversation to that first click to the website. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So Daniel, what current trends are you seeing for health centers and medical practices with digital marketing in 2019?
So most practices now have acknowledged the relevance and the importance of social media. A lot of them were latecomers to that. They were concerned about some of the information they were conveying, from a clinical and ethical standpoint, what they could say, what they couldn't say, how to deal with things. I'm sure you've experienced like negative patient feedback, how to deal with those things. But for social media, we really try to impart to them what a valuable tool it is in patient acquisition through Facebook and Instagram's advertising platforms. So on the sort of organic side, posting, having an active and engaging presence where you're not just posting content that, from the New York Times, the New Yorker, or from, MedWeek, you're posting your own true organic content that speaks to the patient about your experience, your opinions on certain things. That's very important on the organic side. On the paid side, it's using the behaviors, using the data that Facebook aggregates about people in the area to target people who don't already know about you. So that's one thing we've seen a lot of practices come around to. The second is with hospitals sort of absorbing more smaller private practices and thus increasing the competition for market share. A lot of smaller private practices are saying we need to have a marketing budget and a marketing plan, a more holistic plan, to compete, to stay competitive, and to stay independent from the larger health and hospital systems. So a lot of the smaller practices will never outspend, a multi-million-dollar hospital marketing budget, but we have to tell them how they can be more agile and how they can spend better than some of their competitors, but not necessarily more. The last trend I see is a lot of practices re-exploring things like TV and print again, where they're looking at publications that are specifically suited to certain demographics. So if you're talking about, whether it be joint replacement, a 50-plus style magazine with TV certain times a day, they're re-exploring TV. Those initiatives are more brand awareness focused, but I think what they're seeing is the difference between transactional marketing initiatives like search engine marketing and more brand awareness initiatives like TV and radio and even things like YouTube pre-roll ads, social media, more brand awareness concepts.
Gotcha. So these practices are paying attention to what they want those KPIs and the goals of each of these verticals to be, and then finding the way to reach the audience to reach those goals as well.
And I think, as I'm sure you well know, it's important for them to understand the anticipated results, the anticipated KPIs from each vertical. Yes. Not every vertical functions the same. So something like Google search ads is more transactional, where you're going to see an ROI quicker, and the sole intention is to garner a new patient. Other things like, traditional media, social media, display advertising, YouTube pre-roll advertising, those are more brand awareness initiatives, and they take a longer time to convert a patient. It's important for us as marketers to clarify those distinctions so that our clients have the right expectation. We don't want them to think that social media and Google ads produce the same results, in the same period of time. So that's important for them to understand too. And I think that that's something that either they're understanding better themselves or us as agencies are better explaining to them.
Yeah, that's so important to make sure that we're having that clear communication and that conversation about what to expect with each of the different strategies.
And I think that you and I both know that we see people in this space who sort of overpromise and tell clients, medical clients, what they should do and how beneficial this will be for them, and the instantaneous return they'll get. And that sort of, for us as true healthcare marketers, sort of sets us up that, if a client has been with a less than truthful company in the past, they have an inherent sort of, I think, bad taste in their mouth for marketing because it failed the first time. The reason it failed the first time was because the expectations and the goals weren't clear. So as true healthcare marketing agencies, it's our job to better distinguish what the goals are and what the intentions of each platform are.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So now, what are the top 3 things that a medical practice should be doing online to see a return from their digital marketing efforts?
Sure. So that comes down to, as we talked about, sort of understanding the patient journey. So whether it be, for search engine marketing, you're looking at patients in your area who are looking for you right now. So they're searching, orthopedic surgeon near me or plastic surgeon near me. Essentially what they're telling you is they want to find a provider right at this moment. That's an easy sort of one-to-one transaction. Understanding your cost per acquisition and understanding how much it costs to acquire a new patient and then what the revenue derived from that patient is over a 3, 6, 9, 12-month period is really going to help you determine your ROI. The other thing is brand awareness. So not every patient makes a decision instantaneously. Some people have medical problems, but they choose to either self-manage them or they choose to, better term, ignore them. And using data and using behaviors to target those patients with things like display ads, pre-roll ads, social media ads to say, hey, listen, we know you have this problem, or we know that you might be in need of our services here, and you're constantly showing them the brand. So when they finally come to the point of decision making, the brand recall sets in. So now they're not searching cosmetic surgeon near me, they're searching for your name. When they search for your name, your cost per acquisition will always be cheaper because it's your name. That's an important thing that they have that practices need to understand, is that not every patient makes a decision that morning. Sometimes it takes 3 or 6 months to make that decision. The most important part is ROI tracking. So clicks and impressions and shares are very important. But for most physicians, they'll always say, you know, I'm black and white. I want to know what I spent and what I paid, what I got in return. Having call tracking or form tracking in place on the website, where it's new patient tracking or new form tracking, is very important to say, not all of your clicks translated to a patient. So if your website got 10,000 clicks this month, don't think that was 10,000 patients, right? That's not a fair measurement. Having things in place to track new patient calls, obviously HIPAA compliant, or new patient forms, is really going to say, okay, for the money you spent, this is what your return was. Here was your new patient acquisitions. Here was the cost. Here, and then let's talk about the bill charges and the receivables over a course of months. But a lot of marketing is destined to fail, or is destined not to perform as well as it could if there's no ROI tracking in place.
Right.
Because you're spending money now, but you don't know what you're getting for it. So, I mean, I'm sure, as you well know, after 3 to 6 months, people, you know, your clients are going to want answers of truly what the black and white data is. And if we can't provide it to them, a lot of times they see it as waste or sort of intangible. So that's important that we have those metrics in place so that they understand, here's actually what you got for the money you spent.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important to always be paying attention to that data and really seeing what it means compared to those pre-established goals that you've already set for that marketing channel. I love how you keep on going back to kind of the short-term successes and then also the long-term branding that will lead to successes, but it just takes time. So thank you for continuing to bring it back to that. Not all marketing is created with the same goal in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. There's room for brand awareness. There's room for transactional. It's about, again, the expectation of what each initiative is and what that initiative is going to produce. So that's very important for us to be able to communicate to them.
Yes, definitely. So what's the top strategy that should be followed, but often marketing teams get wrong?
So I think with marketing teams and when physicians are discussing marketing with their internal teams or external teams, it's becoming locked in to a budget per year, right? So a practice will say, okay, we're only going to spend this much money per year. It helps from a fiscal perspective and it helps from a financial planning perspective, but it doesn't help when you have a campaign or something you're doing that's working very well, but you can't pour gas in that fire. You can't add to that fire because you're locked into this amount. So if you had if you were spending $5,000 a month in Google ads and it was performing incredibly well and it was working very well and you were getting a great ROI on that, well, if you have a yearly budget, you can't add to that because you've already allocated your money for 12 months. Same thing with social. So if your social campaigns are incredibly engaging and they're incredibly effective and generating traffic to the site, which is translating to patients, you can't then spend more money and thus get more engagement and more brand awareness because you've locked yourself into only spending a certain amount of money over the course of 12 months. So I think what practices need to look at is quarterly, the data that they're getting from their internal or external teams, what it means, what their ROI is, and then projecting another 3-month budget. For a lot of things as well, data takes time to accumulate. So especially with brand awareness and social, we want to look at that data and that engagement over more than just 30 days. We want to look at 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, and then make strategic decisions based on the data we've gathered, right? So if we only have 2 weeks to run a Facebook ad and make a decision off the data, well, we have a limited reach and limited impressions and thus limited data. It's helpful if we can say, okay, for 90 days, we're going to run these 2 ads against each other. We're going to test these different creatives, or we're going to test these different ad copies. And then at the end of 90 days, we're going to explore what the data said and then make decisions based on that. But it's hard when we know the next 90 days, we have the exact same amount of money. If we knew that something was producing and we knew that something was effective and it was producing an ROI, why not pour gas in that fire? So that's something I think a lot of practices should restructure, is how they look at their marketing budgets. January 1st, your budget shouldn't be allocated through December 31st. It should be a quarterly strategy.
Yeah, and you hear about this much more with, I feel like, e-commerce sites that are
Mhm.
selling products. It's
Yeah,
easy, very easy to measure with that first
absolutely.
purchase, dollar in, dollar out. If you're getting
Absolutely.
that dollar in, dollar out with follow-up purchases afterwards, adding to the customer lifetime value, it's
Right.
easy to scale. But
Absolutely.
with medical practices, often having that set budget ends up holding you back in the long run. Because if you're getting a client in and it's converting well, and that ratio between customer acquisition costs and lifetime value is working in your favor, keep pushing that.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, especially in healthcare, a patient acquisition has different values, right? So if for a simple example, if a patient comes in with, and sees a physician one time, right, for an acute injury or acute condition, the provider may make $200 or $150. So if their cost per acquisition for that patient was $40 and their return was $150, it's about 3 to 1. But if that
Mhm.
patient then needs to undergo a complex surgery that the bills are now tens of thousands of dollars, well, that's a whole different metric now, right? So we have to look at, unlike e-commerce where everything has a flat rate and a flat sort of cost to produce, and then your income off that, medical practices vary so much in what the revenue generated from the procedure itself to the insurance company to everything. There's so many variables that you can't just sort of say, okay, here's your flat ROI for every new acquisition. Some acquisitions have a 3 to 1 ROI, some have a 300 to 1 ROI. So that's why quarterly we need to look at things like revenue and bill charges to say, here's what it's actually producing, which is important.
Yeah, and actually, in a previous podcast episode, we were talking about how when you're creating these marketing campaigns and thinking about the customer journey or that prospect journey, think about those follow-on services. If you're fixing the knee, then it might be the hip, then it
Yep.
might be the other hip.
Yeah,
So really
exactly.
pay attention to all those other services and surgeries and things that your practice will be beneficial for in the future for them.
Absolutely. And that also translates to outside of just an orthopedic practice, but any type of practice. There's also the intangible of if you provide a good service to a patient, the referrals that will come from that patient, that's almost impossible to measure because that patient might tell 5 of their friends to go see you, and you may not be able to track that, or you might not know it's how that patient found you. But that's ROI as well that you can't track, but is important to understand. So there's tangible ROI and there's the intangibles as well. There's also the idea that so if you're a primary care provider or you're a dentist or you're even someone who sees acute conditions. I have a 7-year-old son, so I may take my son to the same primary care physician as I see because I like him. That's value as well too, sort of the loyalty to that practice. That's a lifetime value, so they have to look at that as well.
Yeah, yep, that is so important. Those, the tangible and the intangible, and really how the network of revenue that your practice could be bringing in, could stem from one person in particular and just grow out from there.
Absolutely. It's why
Mhm.
I think years ago, a lot of physicians went door to door to other referring physicians' offices to solicit referrals, to get their follow-ups or the things they couldn't treat. That was the intention. Now that's often done on the patient side, where if the patient is happy and you're providing good service and good outcomes to the patient, they're the ones who are going to spread the word about you, and they're the ones who are going to refer people to you. So again, it's an intangible, and that sort of intangible is difficult for us to digest because we want to see the data and we want to know everything that's happening. But in the community, it's very important.
Mhm. Great, great. So, Daniel, your business is Gold Medical Marketing, and you're a top ranked agency for healthcare and medical practices. Tell us a little bit about your company and your services.
So we do everything from traditional digital marketing, whether that be web design, Google pay-per-click, SEO, content creation, social media management, marketing, video production, graphic design, really the whole gamut of services for a practice. We pride ourselves in being sort of a one-stop shop for orthopedic, spine, and neurosurgery practices. We understand that for brand messaging and brand consistency, having everything in-house is important. I think one of our bigger distinctions is sort of the understanding of ROI and how to compliantly track ROI and tie that down to revenue to show a practice true growth from a financial perspective, not just from a digital perspective. We want to take the digital data and translate that into financial data for them so they can really understand their marketing program and what's being done for them. So I think we are the only firm in the country who specializes solely in those three fields. Mm-hmm. So we've spent about 10 years figuring out not just the clinical side, but also the patient's perspective. We like to tell a lot of our marketing around the thousands of interviews we've done with patients to understand how they think, and then translate that to a practice so that practice can be positioned to understand the patient and thus acquire more patients.
Yes. Great. Awesome. And then lastly, are there any digital marketing strategies that your team is currently testing that you don't think many other agencies are implementing for their clients?
I think one of the things we've come around to a lot more recently is display advertising. Google's gotten a lot better at where it puts display advertising, how the display network works. And we're starting to understand better that, as we mentioned earlier, that not every transaction is instantaneous, especially with orthopedics. People delay seeing a specialist or delay a procedure for extended periods of time. But because of the data aggregation on Google and with Facebook as well, those brand awareness initiatives are really important. So when that patient does make the decision, we're top of mind, and then the cost per acquisition is cheaper. I think a lot of agencies focus a lot on just search, just SEO, just Google searches. We realize that not every patient wakes up one day and says, okay, I'm going to have surgery. There's a journey there. So it's understanding that journey and then using brand awareness to capture that patient is something that we've really, perfected over the last year.
Mm-hmm. Great. So rather than only targeting people at the end of the funnel when they're ready to make that decision, it's about capturing them at the top of the funnel and kind of being there every step of the way so that when they're ready to finally give you a call in your practice a call, you're already, top of mind. They already know your phone number by heart.
Absolutely. Exactly. And that's what we've seen with social. For a lot of what we've seen with social, it is very transactional. We are seeing patient acquisitions come immediately from social ads. On the other side, we're also seeing it as a brand awareness tool. So using data we're getting from social to say, okay, here's the ads or here's the audiences that are immediately transactional, and here's the ones where they're focused on where we're focusing on brand awareness. It's important to differentiate those two because we do see a lot of ROI, or we see a tremendous ROI on social media marketing. It's just depending upon what the target is, what the service line is, and what the focus is. That's where we're seeing that. I think for you, explaining, I'm sure as you explain to your clients that not everything is instantaneous.
Yes.
Here's what we're focusing on from a brand awareness perspective. Here's what we're focusing on from a transactional perspective.
Yep, absolutely. Daniel, is there anything else that I forgot to ask?
Not that I can think of. No, I think you've done quite a thorough job in asking me the right questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Social Speak podcast. I loved hearing your perspective, and I know for a fact that you guys over at Gold Medical Marketing are doing a fantastic job for your clients. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege to be on the show, and I can't thank you enough.
Great. Wow, that was such a pleasure having Daniel on our show today. Now, I had a couple of great takeaways from this, and I'm sure that you did as well for your own medical practice. The first thing is to make sure that you understand the goals of the marketing programs that you're running. Are your campaigns geared towards one-time transactions or getting somebody in the door right when they're ready to come on in? Or are they built around branding and brand recognition? And then also understanding how these campaigns actually affect your customer acquisition cost. The next takeaway I had was understanding your patient journey. So it's not just what happens online and the language that they see online, but also how that translates to their experience within your office. And when they're talking with somebody to schedule an appointment, are they knowledgeable about the services that you offer? Are you making a good first impression with your website, with your social media, with that phone call? And then lastly, and I think that this is most important, is thinking about your marketing budget, not on an annual basis, but rather on a quarterly basis. If a campaign is working well and bringing clients in the door, and that customer acquisition cost to lifetime value or even first-time value is leading to a positive return for your practice, you'll want to continue to scale that over time. So rather than, again, thinking about your marketing budget as an annual budget, we recommend putting it into 3-month increments and doing a quarterly assessment of how your campaigns have either led to your goals or where they leave room for improvement. So thank you again, Daniel, for joining our show today. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the Social Speak Network. We are on YouTube and also Podbean. And I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.